It was a quiet night when I suddenly woke up for no particular reason. Rolling over with a groan, I blinked a few times in the darkness, trying to figure out what time it was. As my eyes adjusted, I realized with confusion that my wife, Jenny, was standing over me next to the bed. "Jen?" I mumbled sleepily. "What are you doing up?" She quickly put a finger to her lips and shushed me. "Don't make a sound," she whispered urgently. I heard it too. My tired mind struggled to make sense of what she was saying. Heard what? I stared at her shadowy form looming over me in the dark bedroom, completely perplexed. Jenny seemed tense as she stood there listening intently. The moonlight filtering through the blinds cast an eerie glow over half of her face. After what felt like forever, she finally stepped away from the bed and quietly left the room. Thoroughly confused and now wide awake, I lay there staring up at the ceiling. What had Jenny heard that made her act so strange? Our house was usually very quiet at night, and I certainly hadn't heard anything out of the ordinary before she woke me up. After a few more minutes of puzzlement, I got up and headed out to the hall to try and figure out what was going on. "Jen?" I called softly as I walked through the dark house. No response. She didn't appear to be inside anymore. Starting to feel unsettled, I peeked out the front windows, but her car was still in the driveway. I carefully opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. "Jenny?" I said louder this time. I heard a rustling sound and turned to see her stepping out from the shadows by the bushes in the front yard. She quickly came up the porch steps, looking relieved to see me. "Oh good, you're up," she said, her voice still hushed. "Did you hear it again?" "Hear what?" I asked, totally lost. "Jen, what's going on?" She chewed her lip nervously, glancing around our dark yard. "The scratching sound from something trying to get in. It's very faint, but I've heard it a couple of times tonight." I stared at her. Scratching. Was she having some bizarrely vivid dream about raccoons on our roof? But she seemed completely coherent and convinced she was hearing something. Jenny looked at me anxiously. "You really didn't hear anything? Here, come stand by the bushes, that's where it seems loudest." Humoring her, I followed her back to the side of the porch. She was right, it was creepily dark back there in the shadow of the bush. We stood there in silence, and I strained my ears listening for anything abnormal. But all I could hear were normal night noises. Leaves rustling, a dog barking faintly in the distance, and the chirping of crickets. "I don't hear any scratching, Jen," I finally said. She shook her head impatiently. "Just wait, it comes and goes, but I swear something is trying to get inside." She fixed her gaze on the basement window that was partially blocked by the bushes. I sighed, suddenly feeling very tired. "Honey, I think you were just having a bad dream. Let's go back to bed." Jenny looked almost offended. "I know the difference between a dream and reality, Rob. I'm telling you there is something trying to claw its way into our basement." She gestured emphatically at the window. I took her hand gently. She seemed truly freaked out, even if I couldn't hear whatever phantom scratching noises she was so convinced of. "Let's do a sweep of the basement and ground floor to help you feel better, okay? Then we'll check that all doors and windows are locked up tight." Jenny relaxed slightly and nodded. "Okay, thank you. I'm sorry for waking you, but this is so unnerving." We entered the house again, and I turned on lights as we methodically worked our way through the basement and first floor. I made a big show of double-checking that every window and the external door were closed and locked, while Jenny watched anxiously. As expected, there were no signs of any break-in attempts or strange noises. "See, babe, the house is secure. No scratching creatures trying to get inside," I said reassuringly after we finished the full inspection. Jenny still seemed troubled, but finally agreed to try going back to bed. I quickly fell back asleep, but apparently she lay awake for hours still listening intently for any odd sounds. In the morning over coffee, she admitted sheepishly that she hadn't heard the scratching again after we checked the house. "I'm sorry for dragging you all over the place in the middle of the night. It must have just been my imagination playing tricks on me," she said, shaking her head. "No worries, I'm just glad you feel better now," I assured her, giving her hand a comforting squeeze. We both had a good laugh about the silly midnight goose chase. A week later, though, I was awoken again by Jenny standing over the bed, urging me to stay quiet. She was positive she had heard the faint scratching noises again, and this time she said they were coming from the back of the house instead of the basement. Not wanting to dismiss her concerns again, I dutifully followed her through the house to listen at various windows, but just like before, I couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary. Jenny even asked me to check outside again in case she had truly heard an intruder, but the yard was empty and still. I convinced her to try lying down with me again, and she eventually fell into a troubled sleep. But over the next 2 weeks, this scene played out several more times. Jenny would wake abruptly in the night and be convinced some menacing presence was trying to scratch its way into our home. She became obsessed with patrolling the house at all hours and listening intently at doors and windows. The lack of sleep started to take a toll on her, and dark circles formed under her eyes. I desperately tried to reassure her there was nothing going on, but made sure to humor her nighttime house checks, so she knew I wasn't dismissing her concerns. I started to worry that the paranoia and obsession signaled a worsening of the anxiety issues Jenny had struggled with in the past. But when I gently suggested she make an appointment with her doctor, she became offended and insisted she wasn't imagining things. One night when I got up to use the bathroom, I paused outside the guest room door where Jenny had taken to sleeping some nights to be farther away from the scratching. To my shock, I heard her softly talking to someone inside the room. "Hold on. I think he's up. Just stay quiet for now, we don't want him hearing you," she whispered. There was no reply, and I pushed the door open in alarm. "Jenny, who are you talking to?" I asked urgently, flicking on the light. She was sitting cross-legged on the bed, but there was no one else in the room. She blinked hard in the sudden brightness. "Oh, did I wake you? I'm sorry, I was just talking to myself a bit while I was listening." I stared at her. "It sounded like you were whispering to another person, telling them to stay quiet." Jenny avoided my eyes, absent-mindedly picking at a thread on the comforter. "I guess I'm more tired than I realized," she said with a weak laugh. I crossed the room and sat down next to her on the bed, taking her hands in mine. "Sweetheart, I really think we should make an appointment with your doctor. All this paranoia about scratching noises is taking a real toll. Maybe an adjustment in your medication could help." Jenny sighed and slumped a little. "I know it sounds crazy, Rob, but I swear I'm not imagining things. I'm not hallucinating or hearing voices." She looked at me pleadingly. "But maybe you're right. Seeing my doctor couldn't hurt." I felt a rush of relief and hugged her tightly. "I just want what's best for you, and some peace and quiet in this house again," I said lightly, trying to cheer her up. She gave a small smile that didn't reach her troubled eyes. The next week, her doctor ordered some blood tests and brain scans to check for any potential medical causes behind the auditory hallucinations. But all the tests came back normal. Jenny rejected the doctor's suggestion of adjusting her medication, insisting she wasn't depressed or anxious. That night I found her sitting outside in the backyard, just staring obsessively at the basement window, watching for any signs of movement. It was clear that getting a clean bill of health from the doctor hadn't alleviated her concerns at all. "Jenny, you're going to get bitten alive out here. Come inside, please," I urged her. She reluctantly let me steer her back into the house. Later, as we lay in bed, she broke down crying softly. "You must think I'm crazy," she choked out. "Hearing things that aren't there, convinced some creature is trying to break into our house." I smoothed her hair back and spoke reassuringly. "I don't think you're crazy. I think you're just very stressed. It's been causing your mind to play tricks on you. But we'll get through this." I noticed with alarm that her pillow was dotted with clumps of hair that had fallen out. The stress was clearly taking a massive physical toll on her now, too. Finally, after over a month of intermittent scratching sounds only Jenny could hear, she began begging me to invite people over to see if they might hear it. I reached out to a few close friends and family members, and they kindly agreed to spend the night on our couch to validate Jenny's concerns. But of course, no one else heard the phantom noises Jenny was so tormented by. If anything, it only made her more agitated that she was the only one experiencing the bizarre auditory phenomenon. I also tried recording video and audio overnight, in case the scratching was somehow getting picked up on devices, even if human ears couldn't detect it. But just like with our house guests, the playbacks revealed no evidence of anything out of the ordinary, only amplifying Jenny's distress. She became completely withdrawn, refusing to leave the house or interact with anyone besides me. She dropped unnecessary whispers and secrecy about the scratching, instead ranting about it openly to me, even when we weren't alone. I started to worry she was becoming a danger to herself. One night I was up late working in the office after Jenny had gone to bed. Through the baby monitor, I used to keep an ear on her. I heard her get suddenly out of bed and start walking through the rooms, opening and closing doors. Then I heard her shocked voice exclaim, "Rob, it got in! Come look!" I rushed out of my office and ran upstairs to see Jenny standing in the middle of the hallway clutching a hammer. Her wide eyes were fixed on a closet door that was cracked open. "It's in there, it finally got in," she said breathlessly. I grabbed her arm, alarmed at the sight of the hammer. "Jenny, put that down, nothing is in the closet. I heard it, the scratching, it was so clear," she insisted, trying to shake off my grip on her arm. "It wants me to open the door the rest of the way, but I'm not falling for that." Her voice was rising to a near shriek. I struggled to pry the hammer safely from her hand, while she continued babbling wildly about the scratching creature luring her to open the closet. I got the hammer away from her and pulled her against my chest, hugging her tightly. "Shh, it's okay, you're okay," I soothed repeatedly as she stopped struggling and sagged limply in my arms. I helped her back into bed, and she was so exhausted she fell into a deep sleep almost immediately. Looking down at her sleeping form, I knew I couldn't deny it anymore. Her grip on reality was slipping rapidly. Something had to be done. When she woke the next morning, I gently but firmly insisted that she needed inpatient treatment. I hated having to force her, but it was the only way she would get the constant care she now needed. Jenny became hysterical at first when I explained my decision, insisting she wasn't crazy and begging me not to send her away. But her panic attack only strengthened my resolve that full-time psychiatric care was the only option left. After she had calmed down, my gentle persistence helped her see that she very clearly needed medical intervention to stop this torturous spiral. Jenny reluctantly agreed to the arrangement on the condition that I visit her every single day she was in the ward, which I readily promised. The orderly at the desk gave me a sad smile as I signed Jenny in later that day. "Don't worry, sir. Your wife is in good hands here. We see cases like this sometimes, where vivid hallucinations completely take over a person's perception of reality," he said kindly as he took Jenny's bag. Jenny hugged me tightly before they led her away, tears streaming down her face. My heart broke watching her shuffle dejectedly down the hall, but I knew this was the only way to save her from herself and whatever vicious stress-induced psychosis had taken hold. That first night at home without her was brutally lonely. I lay awake missing the comforting sound of her breathing next to me. After hours of tossing and turning, I must have finally drifted off. Suddenly I was shocked awake by an eerie scratching sound coming from somewhere inside the house. I bolted upright, my heart pounding wildly as the faint but distinct scratching continued sporadically. As I sat there frozen in alarm listening to the very real noises, the truth hit me like a punch in the gut. She had been telling the truth all along. Jenny wasn't crazy. Something sinister really was trying to scratch its way into our home, and I had just locked her away and left us both completely vulnerable to it. Bile rose in my throat as the implications fully sank in. I scrambled to flick on lights and grab the hammer from where I had stashed it in the closet earlier. The scratching faded away once the lights were on, but I knew with chilling certainty that it would return the moment I tried to sleep again. I sank down onto the bed, trembling all over from the horror of my mistake. What have I done?